November 9, 1872, Boston, Massachusetts. A gas lamp flickers in the basement of a dry goods store at 83 Summer Street. It's after business hours. The city is quiet, and then a spark finds a pile of cheap fabric. Within minutes, the building is an inferno. The fire leaps to the next structure and the next. The city's horse-drawn steam engines arrive, but they are useless. Their hoses cannot reach the pressure needed to fight a fire this tall, this hungry. The water pressure in the hydrants is mysteriously, catastrophically low. This is the start of the Great Boston Fire. It will burn for 20 hours. It will consume 65 acres of the city's economic heart, 776 buildings including banks, warehouses, newspaper offices, and the entire financial district. It will leave 20,000 people homeless and cause over $75 million in damage, the equivalent of nearly $2 billion today. But the real destruction won't be measured in ashes or homeless families. The real destruction will happen on paper, in ledger books across the country, because this fire won't just burn down a city. It will burn down an idea, the idea that risk could be managed, that the future could be insured. And when the last ember dies, an entire industry will lie bankrupt, and a new terrifying understanding of modern catastrophe will rise from the smoke. The setup, the tinderbox of progress. To understand the financial detonation, you must first see Boston in 1872. It is not a colonial town. It is a pre-modern metropolis. Its buildings are packed tight, a maze of brick, wood, and stone. They are tall, 5 and 6 stories, built right up to the property line. Their walls are shared. Their attics connect. They are a perfect fire highway. And inside these buildings is the concentrated wealth of a booming industrial nation. Textiles from Lowell, whale oil, leather, books, machinery, and in the vaults and safes, bonds, stocks, and currency. This isn't a residential neighborhood. It's the central processing unit of American capitalism. Protecting this wealth is a patchwork of over 50 different fire insurance companies. They are the alchemists of the Gilded Age, turning fear of loss into profit. They've never been truly tested. Their financial models are based on the old Boston, the smaller fires, the contained disasters. They are about to discover that in the new world of density and interconnected wealth, a disaster is no longer an event, it's a systemic cascade. The fire, the unstoppable algorithm. The fire spread with a terrifying logical efficiency. It was a real-time demonstration of every single flaw in the city's design. Flaw 1, the water. The fire hydrants were connected to a water system that relied on a single massive reservoir on Beacon Hill. The pipes were too narrow. The pressure was too low. When multiple engines tapped the system, it collapsed. The firefighters watched as their hoses went limp. They had the men, they had the will, but they had no water. Flaw 2, the architecture. The fireproof brick and stone buildings were death traps. Their exteriors held, but the interiors were wooden tinderboxes. The heat would build inside until the windows exploded, shooting jets of flame across the streets to the next building. The fire didn't walk, it jumped. Flaw 3, the wind. A cruel, steady wind blew from the northwest, creating a firestorm that raced toward the harbor. It became a wall of flame a half-mile wide, moving with the purpose of a predator. Demolition crews with dynamite raced ahead of it, trying to create fire breaks, but they were always one block behind. By dawn, the heart of Boston was a smoldering plain of rubble. The physical shock was immense, but the financial shockwave was just beginning to travel. The financial chain reaction, the run on the insurers. In the days after the fire, the scale of the loss became clear. $75 million. It was an unimaginable sum, and here was the problem. That $75 million wasn't just lost property. It was promised money. It was the total of thousands of insurance policies held by building owners, business owners, and banks. Every smoking ruin had a policy, and those policies were now claims, all due at once. The insurance industry faced a simple, horrifying math problem. Total industry capital in Boston, $50 million. Total claims from the fire, $75 million. The system was insolvent by $25 million on day one. But it was worse than that. The risk wasn't pooled in one giant company. It was spread across dozens of small, undercapitalized firms. Many were mutual companies or local outfits. They had never imagined a scenario where every single policyholder in their portfolio would file a claim on the same day. A run on the insurers began, not by depositors but by policyholders desperate for cash to rebuild. They needed their settlements now. Company after company opened their books, did the math, and closed their doors. They called it suspending operations. It was bankruptcy. Iconic Boston firms like the Boston Manufacturers Mutual and the Howard Insurance Company were wiped out. National companies with heavy exposure saw their stock vaporize. The fire had created a new phenomenon, the catastrophic liquidity event. It wasn't that the companies didn't have assets, it was that all their assets were tied up in long-term investments, and all their liabilities were demanded in cash. Immediately, they were financially illiquid, and illiquidity in a panic is indistinguishable from insolvency. The trust in the entire concept of fire insurance shattered overnight. If the companies in the most modern city in America couldn't pay, who could? The very instrument, designed to create stability, had become the vector of systemic collapse. The domino effect, from insurers to everything. The insurance bankruptcies were not the end. They were the first domino. Banks that had loaned money to businesses based on insured collateral found their security was worthless. They called in other loans, tightening credit citywide. Businesses across the country that had dealings with Boston firms saw their receivables vanish into the ash. The fire became a national credit crunch. Investors from London to New York watched in horror as a premier American city revealed it had no financial firewall. Capital grew wary. The cost of borrowing for every American city went up. The city of Boston itself teetered on the brink of municipal bankruptcy. It had to borrow massively to fund relief and rebuilding, mortgaging its future for a generation. In the span of a week, a single physical event had triggered a full-blown financial contagion. It proved that in an industrialized, interconnected economy, a disaster in one city block could threaten the economic stability of the entire nation. Risk, they discovered, was not contained. It was networked. Speaking of systemic failures and unforeseen chain reactions, let's talk about building a resilient creative project. You're constructing a documentary about this cascade of disaster. You need audio that conveys the roar of an unstoppable inferno, the frantic chaos of a failing system, and the cold, silent dread of financial ruin. You need the crackle of flames, the shout of firemen, the frantic ring of telegraphs, the hollow sound of a bank vault door closing on nothing. But sourcing that sound without risking your own project's stability in a maze of copyright law can feel like playing with fire. That's where Epidemic Sound comes in. Think of it as your insured, reliable foundation for sound. A massive library of high-quality, royalty-free music and sound effects. No sudden claims, no liquidity crises, just solid, dependable access to thousands of tracks. From roaring, chaotic scores that mimic collapsing timbers, to tense, percussive music for a financial panic, to the bleak, empty soundscapes of aftermath. Need the specific whoosh of a gas lamp igniting? The terrible groan of a brick wall collapsing? The frantic scribble of a clerk tallying unsustainable losses? They've got it. Their search tools help you find the precise audio asset without sparking a legal blaze. Right now, Epidemic Sound is offering a free trial. Use the link in the description to access the library. Thanks to Epidemic Sound for sponsoring this investigation into the anatomy of a disaster. Now back to the ashes and the desperate search for a new rulebook. The response: building a firewall of law. In the smoky aftermath, the lesson was brutally clear. You could not prevent every fire, but you could prevent a systemic collapse. The reaction was twofold, and it created the modern world of building safety and finance. 1. The building code revolution. Boston led the nation. Out went the old haphazard rules. In came the 1873 Boston Building Act, mandated thicker load-bearing brick walls between buildings, required fireproof materials for interior structures in commercial buildings, regulated the width of streets and the height of buildings relative to street width, standardized fire escapes and stairwell enclosures. This wasn't just advice, it was enforceable law. It became the model for every major American city. The skyscraper age, which was just beginning, was built on Boston's ashes and its new codes. 2. The financial reformation. The insurance industry had to be rebuilt from the ground up. States passed new insurance solvency regulations. Companies were required to maintain large cash reserves relative to their risk. Reinsurance was adopted, the practice of insurance companies spreading their own risk to other, larger companies, creating a financial buffer. Underwriting became more rigorous, based on actual engineering surveys, not guesswork. The goal was no longer just to insure a building, but to insure the system itself against a catastrophic claim. They had learned that the real risk wasn't a burning warehouse. It was every warehouse burning at once. The unseen legacy, the birth of modern risk. The Great Boston Fire of 1872 did more than change buildings and balance sheets. It changed how we think. It gave us the concept of the maximum probable loss, the worst-case scenario that must be planned for. It moved risk management from anecdote to actuarial science. It revealed the interdependency of modern systems, how water pressure, architecture, finance, and municipal governance are all links in a chain, and the chain is only as strong as its weakest link. It created the professional fire inspector and the building commissioner, roles that enforce not just safety, but systemic stability. In essence, the fire forged the principle of preventive regulation. The idea that government and industry have a positive duty to design systems that contain failure, because in a dense capitalist society, failure is contagious. The revelation. So what was the Great Boston Fire really? The revelation is not that it led to fire codes. The revelation is that the Boston Fire was the first great stress test of the modern, interconnected industrial economy. And it failed spectacularly. The ashes revealed that 19th century capitalism had built a phenomenal engine of growth, but had forgotten to install the brakes, the safety valves, or the firewall. The fire proved that in the new age of density and finance, a disaster was no longer a localized tragedy. It was a systemic attack vector. The flames were merely the spark. The real fuel was over-leveraged capital, under-engineered infrastructure, and a fatal underestimation of cascading failure. The burned-out banks and bankrupt insurers were not just casualties, they were symptoms of a world moving faster than its own safeguards. The fire forced a profound, uncomfortable modernization. It demanded that society stop seeing buildings as isolated structures and start seeing them as nodes in a network that needed firewalls in both brick and gold. We live in the world Boston built after its great burning. Every steel beam in a skyscraper, every sprinkler head in a ceiling, every cash reserve in an insurance company is a direct descendant of the lessons learned in those 20 hours. The fire created the very concept of public safety as a systemic engineering challenge. The Great Boston Fire didn't just lead to safer buildings. It led to the understanding that civilization itself is a fragile system, and its continued existence depends not on luck but on the meticulous, unglamorous work of writing codes, mandating reserves, and planning for the catastrophe you pray will never come. It was the day we learned that the price of a modern world is eternal vigilance, not just against flame, but against the far more dangerous fire of collective ruin.